deal with the rest of us most of the time. But, she actually, my youngest doesn't wanna necessarily go in the public, she wants to work for the FBI. She wants to be a forensic accountant.
Okay.
So we'll see,
Hey,
we'll
thanks,
see what she ends up
Michelle.
doing. She'll do an internship with us.
I'm sure Matt, I've shared the story with you, right? I've been Bob Chady, the business manager at Marshall now. That's this governmental accounting class. It's a graduate level class at UWA, right? Sure. I'm sure I told you this. It's like 2 weeks. We're doing statement of cash flows. I'm in a coffee shop on a Saturday doing homework. I'm like, I really need this. I don't need this. Right? Here are 2 data points. Find the other 30. John T accounts all over creation.
To do a cash flow?
Statement of cash flow. Oh my gosh, statement of cash flow.
The good news is your statements don't even have a cash flow.
I mean, that's it, right? So I remember chatting at Johnson Block at the time, and I'm like, hey, Tiffany, he goes, I tell you, I've not done a statement of cash flow in like years. He goes, because we don't do any utilities. If you're
Yep.
working for a utility,
Exactly, that's the only time I have to do it is on our utility account.
tell me how to do some school accounting better, right? Utility.
I will call to order the Finance, Buildings, and Grounds Committee meeting, which was duly noticed on January 20th, 2023, through posting and notification of the press in accordance with Wisconsin Statute 19.84. The first item is a safety message. And this is on how to spot and correct ergonomic hazards. And really, there are some general tips. And often, when we think ergonomics, people may think workstation improvements, which you definitely need to do that. One of the critical pieces is somebody who is familiar with proper ergonomics to evaluate your workstation and then, quite frankly, look to redesign the awkwardness and positions out of it. Often we slouch. So a chair that gets you up and your back straight will ultimately help with back and hip and all of those kinds of issues. One of the things, particularly working from home, is the distance to screen as to our windows. Ideally, we would want these at about this distance up. We could look straight forward and far enough away that we're not squinting, but because we can increase the text. So those are some of the things from a workstation standpoint. And really, I talked about the back, but so here this is probably looser, but I'm trying to sit straight up just for that proper posture. One of the culprits from an ergonomic standpoint is when we are handling material, just stuff, picking it up. Always use your legs. And often we want to pick something up and twist to sit it down. And actually, it would be better if we would turn all the way around to place it down. Over a time of misusing your body, and that will lead to definitely issues as we really age. And I can state that that is very true. Then, some of the really key pieces of other ways to just look at. If there is a tool to do it, use the tool. Make sure that when you're looking for things And it's that where am I at, what am I doing? And I get at, do I have the proper tools to do this the easiest as I possibly can? That part is completely immeasurable, but just working smarter. I think about the advent of all of the battery operated tools. That has completely changed where you're at and what are you doing, and being safer because now we've gotten rid of the electric car. But then also, many of those items they weren't necessarily designed with ergonomics in mind, where a lot of the battery operated tools are specifically designed with ergonomics. So just some of the key things to keep in mind from an ergonomic standpoint, and there will be more tips in our minutes since I sent this to Denise ahead of time. So thank you. Any questions, any safety shares anyone has that any lessons we all could learn? I'm sure there's some from somebody, but that's okay. All right, next item, adopt the January 20th, easy for me to say, 23rd, 2023 Finance Buildings and Grounds Committee agenda. Do I have a motion? Okay. All those in favor of accepting the agenda as posted, say aye. Aye. That passes unanimously. The next item, presentation of our fiscal year 2022-2023 year-to-date December financial summaries and consider approval to move to full board. Mr. McCray.
Thank you, Commissioner Ardrey. As usual, our financials are rather steady. There's nothing odd, if you will, which is good for us as a district to report out. They flow as predicted, particularly through December. You'll notice, obviously, in December, we saw a large state equalization aid payment on our revenue limit side, on our revenue side, not our revenue limit side, but our revenue side. And that was great because we got to a really low cash position in November, so we're able to record that in December. So I do want to maybe look forward a little bit to January and February. And the reason why that's important is our tax settlements normally come in January and February, a dominant portion thereof from the different municipalities. The city of Janesville processed their tax bills a little bit differently this year and worked with the county. And as a result, there was a delay in distribution and a delay in collection. So typically in January, the district receives a large portion. For example, last year, we received approximately $12 million from the city of Janesville. This year, we received $5 million from the city of Janesville because of that delay in processing. All right, so there may be some implications from a cash flow perspective in January. Thankfully, we have a line of credit. It's our intent not to tap that line of credit, but we do have that for a period of time. The city's been very good, and this was certainly an unanticipated event, if you will, on their behalf. But they believe in February we will receive essentially what we are due to that point in February. So if you think of it as last year we received 12, this year we received 5, that's $7 million difference, right? We will see in February. Just a delay, but again, could cause some cash flow implications for us. So it's these types of things, these oddities, if you will, or nuances to cash flow or expenses or revenues that we really try to point out. Again, school finance after the budget is adopted is rather predictable since we don't produce widgets and require sales on a day-to-day basis.
Questions or comments for Mr. McCray?
So is this event from the city going to be recurring? Is this how they're going to do it going forward, or was this just a 2022 January change?
Yeah, no, very fair question. In the correspondence we received from Dave Goddick, it's pretty much it's an anomaly this year. So I think it had to do, quite frankly, with the printing, right? I don't know, there's just something on the back of the house that was different. So I think they tried to be better and more efficient with the resources that they're provided, and I think partnering with the county and the printing of tax, that's kind of how things just did not materialize as planned.
I was just wondering if it's something to plan for next year, that's why, or, you know, in consecutive years.
Yeah, no, great question though, thank you.
Anything else from anyone? One comment, since we're not quite to the point of having our dashboard available, with the reports, if we could just simply state, like the major, I'll say, the changes for that period of time, or if they're anticipated, but they didn't necessarily happen. So like you just mentioned, this one could have been just a point N for January, expect that. So when
Yeah,
we're looking at a table of numbers, it would be nice to know what has changed from the last month.
Sure.
So-
Nope, that's fair. We could probably do more of a memo. Probably Mr. Pennington did more of a memo in the past, and we can revisit that.
Yeah, I mean, not a whole lot more detail, just simply what has changed or big change or anticipated changes, so.
So Commissioner Ardrey, be careful when you ask the finance department for detail.
I know, that's why I'm trying to make sure I get it scaled back here. Okay, is there a motion to move it to the full board?
Yes.
Second.
All right, motion by Commissioner Dummerhausen, second by Commissioner Hayworth. All those in favor say aye. Aye. That passes unanimously.
Does this usually go consecutive?
Yes, it does. So it made me wonder, is your thought on that? When you just-
I didn't think we ever had to take the monthly summaries to the number vote, besides consent, like it isn't a discussion generally.
Yeah, only if there's some particular item to pull out. And usually for those items, I will just cover in the committee report. So, okay, next item. Our 1.5, 2022 financial audit report. Mr. McCray.
Sure. So I'm going to introduce Wendy Unger, the partner with Baker Tilly who conducts and oversees our audit. She has a number of team members who assist her with that. But before I do, I'd really be remiss without first kind of talking a little bit about the audit process. I'd say from our perspective in the business services department, the group itself, is the audit to some extent is almost on our minds on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, right? So it's not a particular point in time, simply because we're always considering, either DPI updates, federal updates, updates to GAAP, updates to generally accepted accounting principles or GASB, Governmental Accounting Standards Board requirements. So the audit is almost always living for us, right? It's not just an event, right? It's a way of thinking about how we do business within the district. Typically, though, just kind of the mechanics of the audit do technically begin in the spring, most likely May, where the audit firm, in this case, again, Baker Tilly, will send us, these are the things we're going to be looking for. What does your summer schedule look like? When do we begin to coordinate on-site or remote visits to begin to examine your books and other documentation? Because the other documentation is, again, beyond the numerics. They're looking at board minutes, right? They're looking at policy. They're looking at procedures, not just really the book or our Skyward chart of accounts. So keep that in mind. And then we go through the summer, right? We think we're done, right? Summer passes, the new school year begins. All right, that's pretty much when we're wrapping up and we're reporting certain audit requirements to the Department of Public Instruction, right? Wendy and her team, right, continue remotely, if you will, as part of our audit process. And really the audit is not due to the Department of Public Instruction until December 15th, right? So again, we're thinking about the audit all year, the mechanics of it beginning in May, and it's really final and done when submitted to the DPI, again, on December 15th, right? So just to kind of paint a little bit of the audit picture for us. Keep in mind, our audit, a little bit different because we have a charter school, right? So that being RUHS, and you may say, well, we have many charter schools. Why does RUHS get an audit? Well, it's because we still receive funds related to RUHS, and as part of, we'll say, recent federal action, right, the state is required to mandate us to have a fiscal audit for Rock University High School, RUHS, right? The others not so much because that's kind of, they're not startups anymore, right? We're not receiving funds for those charter schools. And really, before I turn it over to Wendy, right, we really need to give a shout out to the departments that assist, right? So that's everything from payroll and benefits, right, to learning and innovation related to title funding, to student services, special education, when it comes to IDEA, special education funding, right? Medicaid, reimbursement. And then our own, if you will, Tammy Carlson, who is our grants manager, fiscal analyst. There's a lot of grant dollars that she's managing this year. So shout out to Tammy. Again, everyone within business services. And something new for us, you may recall from last year, right, is we would receive a notation because we were now preparing our own financial statements, right? So Matt being a certified public accountant, right, having the wherewithal, the desire, right, the we can do this attitude, spent probably about 80 hours, if you will, preparing the district's financial statements. So in addition to the audit, really a big shout out to Matt for taking us to that next level in terms of the preparation of our financial statements. I know he looks forward to it every year. Because what else would he be doing with the 80 hours, right? So again, a shout out to Matt. Matt's available for questions if you have it. And without further ado, I'll really turn to, one last item is we put these on our website, right? So our audits are always published on the website. And keep in mind too, the audit report, because it's part of our continuing disclosure related to our debt, right? So we have bondholders, right? They want to see the fiscal health of the district, right? And so we're always reporting our audit out to the municipal board. So it's kind of the next step with our audit. So again, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Wendy Unger, CPA and partner for Baker Tilly, who again oversees our audit. She has a brief presentation.
Just setting the stage. Just setting the stage.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you for having me here. You should have in your packet, your board information, a couple-page handout. Looks like this. This is the document I will go through relatively quickly, but really go through some highlights of both the audited financial statements for the district and also the reporting and insights document that you receive as part of the audit process. So the topics I'm going to talk about are some audit results. We'll go through some very high-level financial information. I have a couple additional points in the presentation. If at any point during the discussion you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I'll do my best to address those as we move through. So on the next page of the handout where I've highlighted the audit results, the objective of the audit was to issue an opinion on the financial statements for the district. We've done that. We've issued a clean, unmodified opinion. That's the highest level of assurance you can obtain. That is similar to the opinions that you've received in the past. A clean, unmodified opinion means a couple different things. One, that the information in the financial statements is believed to be materially accurate. All disclosures that are required to be included under our standards have been included within your footnotes. Generally accepted accounting principles have been adhered to, and then accounting principles have been consistently applied from year to year. Dan had mentioned one thing, GASBs, or Governmental Accounting Board standards. Those are items that change on a periodic basis. There's always something new that the GASB wants to be incorporated into financial statements. So I will note that included within your opinion for FY22 is an emphasis of matters paragraph. And that is a paragraph that's added to the opinion to inform the reader that there was a new GASB effective for the district for the year. That was GASB 87. We talked about that for several years. That's the lease standard. So that just really changed how leases, which once were capital assets or capital leases, changed the terminology, changed how they were presented a little bit. And there is some footnote disclosures in your financial statements. But again, I just wanted to note that emphasis of matters paragraph. We will talk in a second. There is another new GASB that the district will need to address for FY23. And again, we'll talk about that on the next page. Turning to the next page then, before I get into financial information, just want to quickly talk about the reporting and insights document that you get. This is the one with the people on the cover. This document accomplishes a couple different purposes. One, it allows us to communicate the required communication that we need to have with you as the Finance Committee and board members. We also utilize that document to communicate any comments or recommendations that might come up as part of the audit process. So as Dan mentioned, he stole a little bit of my thunder. But again, in the previous year, we had a material weakness related to the financial preparation that Baker Tilly did as part of the audit process. Very happy to say that, again, Matt and team did that for FY22. That material weakness is gone. The district currently has no material weaknesses, and that is very impressive. There's not many organizations, either school districts or other governmental entities that I work with, that have that scenario. So again, very positive and very impressive. Included in that document also, as I noted, two-way communication regarding your audit. Towards the back of that document, there's some comments, questions related to solicitation of your input towards future audits. If you have any concerns, anything you'd like to know how we look at or have us look at, please reach out. Happy to do that, but that portion of the report highlights some of the thought-provoking questions, I would say. Also included in there, as I noted, other communications, other recommendations. We continue to have a comment in there regarding the stock that is owned by the district, roughly $12,000 in value, still on the books. Technically, according to state statute, you can't own stock. So again, recommend determining how to rid yourselves of that and possibly sell that. One other point under other recommendations and informational points, again, the GASB I referred to, GASB 96 is what is applicable for FY23. Very similar to leases, same type of thought methodology, but it is for subscription-based IT product. You're all over it. All right. So again, a new GASB, so some additional work that will be required for FY23. Again, the remaining portion of that letter is required communication, nothing included in there that is unusual or unexpected, and very normal and customary. Last item under other reports, as part of the financial statement audit, we also are required to evaluate federal and state programs for the district. For FY22, the district expended roughly $17.3 million of federal funds and over $80 million of state funds. Because you expend over $750,000, we are required to evaluate and test compliance over various federal programs. There's a cycle testing approach, and some are deemed automatically high risk just based on the nature of them. So for FY22, we looked from a federal standpoint at your special education cluster, your ESSER funding, Medicaid, and Title I. And then on the state side, we looked at the general aid and the Common School Fund. Very happy to say none of those programs from a compliance standpoint had any findings. So a very clean audit there. Switching gears into, again, some very high-level financial information. The next page highlights the general fund, your day-to-day operating fund. I presented this actual to budget. As you can see, your actual revenues $126 million compared to $127 million in budgeted revenues. Your revenues came in under budget by $1.2 million. The main category where that is was within your federal programs. The actual results came in under budget by $1.1 million. You were also under budget in your local category. This is where your student fees, athletic fees, your Parker Arts Academy is, and those collectively were roughly $370,000 under budget. Positively, though, on your expenditure side, you were $2.1 million under budget. $4.8 million of that came from your general instruction category, with an offset of a 2.6 overage in your institutional support area. But overall, for FY22, you added $890,000 to fund balance when you budgeted to break even. So a very positive result for your general fund. You ended the year at slightly over $25 million in fund balance. That fund balance has a couple pieces. Roughly $808,000 is what's referred to as non-spendable. Most of that are prepaid expenses, so you pay them in June, but they're a July expense. Cash is gone, but you don't recognize them as an expense until the subsequent year. Good example is insurance. You typically have to pay your insurance before it's due or before you use it, and those are items that sit within your prepaid category, or one example. Your restricted fund balance, $54,000. That's your carryover or library funds that have to be restricted and only used for library purposes. And then the remaining balance, $24 million, is your unassigned category. That's roughly 19% of your general fund operating budget, very strong position. We look for that to be somewhere between 10 and 25%. So very solid. It allows you some flexibility when you do need funds for, working capital or contingency type items. Moving on to the next page, last page of financial information. First column, your special ed fund, 20 million of revenue, 20 million of expenses. That fund has no fund balance, and it shouldn't. It can't, per DPI guidelines. Just keep in mind, of that 20 million, roughly 12 million comes in from your general fund. The remaining portion is funded by federal and state money. Next column is your debt service fund. You levy a tax and you make principal and interest on the debt of the district. You can see used a little bit of fund balance during 22, had 1.4 million as of the end of the year. And those monies are all restricted for debt service purposes. The next column is your capital improvement fund, 1.5 million of revenue. Most of that came in from your general fund. Your general fund transfers money out, and that revenue sits there until you can spend that down. As of the end of the year, 11.2, almost 11.3 million of fund balance in that fund. Your capital projects fund had a little bit of revenue. A good portion of the activity there is just your various projects that were done via the school year that equated to roughly $9 million. You used 9 million of the 22 million you had, and ended the year at 13 million of fund balance remaining in your capital project fund. The last column is your non-major funds. So this is in more detail on page 54 of your audited statements. But this is your food service fund, your gift fund, so Fund 21, your community service fund, Fund 80, and Rock University High School. Although there is a separate audit, that still becomes part of the district statements. So those funds in total had 9.2 million of revenue. Most of that is food service, or roughly slightly over 7 million. Likewise, on the expenditure side, 7.2 million of expenses. Again, most of that is food service, 5.7 million. So overall, those funds added 2 million to fund balance and ended the year at 4.4 million. Just again, a little bit of perspective, your food service saw a nice increase in fund balance by 1.6 million, ended the year at 3.2 million of fund balance. Your Fund 21, your gift fund, $370,000 increase in fund balance, up to over $1 million in end of the year. Community service also saw an increase in fund balance, 117,000, ended the year at 261,000. So overall, very positive activity included in the various funds of the district. On the last page of additional information, I've included page references, so I'm not going to go into this in great detail, but just a couple things to highlight. The district can borrow up to 10% of its equalized value. That figure equates to $573 million of borrowing. As of the end of the year, you had 43.3 million outstanding. That's made up of 4 issues that are due and payable through 2031. So that 4.3 million will go down, your capacity to borrow goes up. But as you can see, roughly $530 million of borrowing capacity as of the end of the year. The other 3 items I've highlighted are your OPEB obligation, your OPEB liability. That's included on page 39. That ended the year at 24.6 million. Keep in mind, the liability portion of that is roughly 31 million. You also have money that you set aside in a trust, so that gets offset against that. So the net of that 31 million and the 6 million you have in trust is the 24.6 million of liability as of the end of the year. Your defined benefit pension plan obligation, this is your stipend plan for administrators, that continues to go down. That was 88,000 as of the end of the year. And then your employee retirement system, this is your participation in WRS, and this is your proportionate share of that plan. That plan continues to be overfunded, which is positive. So on your books as of June 30th, 2022, you have an asset of 34.3 million. It's not cash that's due you. It just is saying that the plan is overfunded from an investment standpoint based on actuarial calculations. And all 3 of those last bullet points, the OPEB, the pension, and the WRS, is all based on actuarial information that we obtain from the district or through WRS. And again, page numbers are referenced there. On the very last page, I've included my email address, my direct line. I'm happy to talk through any of this information with any of you, or be happy to answer any questions you might have now also.
So in summary, our only to-do is sell some stock.
And deal with GASB 96.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Frankly, it's been a pistol trying to get rid of that
I know.
stock. So because they're not shares that we actually have in hand. So trying to get confirmation from the entity in order for us to sell has been a challenge.
So I did mention that, so as long as I've been on the board, and if I go back a number of years, and whether it was control issues or now we've taken care of our financials. Thank you, Matt. Makes me wonder what Dan does. I say it jokingly. I say it jokingly. But we've come a long ways to get to a really clean, and if the only thing is we have shares assigned and we're trying to deal with
Exactly.
that is, that's Herculean to get to that point. So that was the main thing
Yes,
I wanted to say,
definitely.
and thank you for your review and your time and effort.
Thank you.
And just, sorry, if I may, it has been really good working with Baker Tilly, so we appreciate the relationship. I know Matt has spent a significant amount of time. They have a Matt as well on their staff, but the dialogue between the two. It's always fascinating having a former auditor on staff, so I think they get into, at times, some very deep philosophical discussions about things that really no one in this room cares about but the two people who have CPA after their name. But it is a positive relationship, so we do appreciate that.
I'm sorry.
I've got a question about GASBO or GASB, which was?
GASB?
GASB is what you're saying, how you pronounce it?
Yep, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, yes.
Okay, and they changed it from 87 to 96. They're adding a new standard.
They are adding a new one, correct?
And did they send money to do this?
No.
I was afraid of that. Okay, Dan will pay for it, so nothing to worry about.
Preferably not through payroll deduction. So it is interesting, and again, from a lay perspective, certainly in deference to those individuals who have the credential that both Matt and Wendy have. But sometimes we wonder, who are these people who are on the Governmental Accounting Standards Board? Simply because we're like, that's interesting. Like, so for example, Wendy alluded to the forthcoming, right? So how are we going to track the financials related to subscriptions, which are difficult in and of themselves to track, particularly those subscriptions that go over multiple years, right? And so this is where, when we look to, it's just a business services department issue, it is really working with departments such as learning and innovation and perhaps student services in terms of really trying to understand the scope, the nature, the value of subscription services related to a textbook adoption, not related to a textbook adoption as we move forward. Sometimes, right, the image that a business services group, whether it's Milwaukee Public that Wendy audits or the School District of Janesville or Lake Mills, is we say no a lot. And the intent is not for us to say no. Usually it's no when we're the last being asked, but to really kind of be on the forefront of any discussion related to a fiscal issue. So Dr. DeGraff and I and Matt and Tammy and certainly Ms. Perenboom have a really good working relationship, probably the best between those departments and business services over the last 4 years. But that's where we want to be, is really on the forefront to help us navigate. So we're not trying to do, a mountain worth of rework at the end, right? But to really be there on the forefront.
One more question. We didn't spend everything that we had budgeted for, correct? That's why we have our fund balance increased.
Correct, right? So, Ms. Unger referred to essentially just north of $800,000 going to the fund balance. So we do obviously take direction from the board in terms of a Fund 73 obligation, a Fund 46 allotment at year end, right? As well as do we have dollars available at the end of the year? Again, within the business services group, and sometimes I joke that there are probably only 2 people in the county talking a particular topic at one point in time. Remember, that's $800-some thousand, which yes, goes to fund balance, which yes, theoretically would assist us in terms of cash flow. But it is also $800-some thousand when you're aided to approximately 24% on a tertiary level that we're not receiving in aid. Right? So it's not an aidable expense because it is no expense, it's a contribution to the fund balance. So how much do we want? And sometimes, right, we're a little greedy, at least maybe I'm a little greedy in terms of wanting more aid, right, which then reduces the local taxpayer obligation to the schools. That's an oversimplistic viewpoint, right, but it is something to keep in mind in terms of we wouldn't want to contribute $4 million at the end of the fiscal year, should that be an opportunity. It is not, but should that be an opportunity, because again, nearly 25% of that, right, could be aidable, right? So then that would then, on the subsequent year, be $1 million shifted to the local property taxpayer rather than a state aidable expense.
Okay, because it can end up as a penalty to the district as a whole. If we don't budget correctly, the state holds us accountable for that. If we come up short in funds, we're saying we're not figuring it. If we come out long in funds, these both are we can get penalties from the state going forward.
You are very close, right? So if, for example, and thank you for this very granular bird walk, because now only 10 people in the county are having this discussion. If we are able to contribute, a surplus to fund balance, right? Again, a portion of that is not going to be aidable. So it's not so much a penalty, it's just really an opportunity not to capture aid, right? If we were to deficit spend, okay, the oddity is on that deficit spending, assuming it's Fund 10, right, and a non-grant item. So if we were $1 million in the deficit, well, one, right, the committee and the board would be like, well, how did we overspend $1 million, right? But then theoretically, we would be aided at the tertiary level approximately 24% on that, right, deficit budget. So it's not really $1 million, it'd be more like $750,000. But we're not going to let that happen.
Okay, I just know if you're not right on, just above or just below, it could be a big amount, a small amount, it counts against you in some manner on the state aid you get.
There are aid implications either way, yes.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to go into that much detail, but it's something I've always said. Not me, what I've heard, that we have to be as precise as possible because somewhere they'll get you. Not you. Thank you.
So just for the audit, it's just a point of information for the full board. It's not like we are approving the audit to move on to the board or anything. Is that correct?
That is correct. So some of the intent here, just real quick, if I may, Commissioner Ardrey, right, is to really take time, such as we did today, to get a little granular at the committee level. Right, so certainly the full board receives a copy of the audit for both the district as well as Rocky University High School, right? So we want to be transparent in that regard, but rather than taking a significant amount of time to talk about equalization aid and the impact of under or overspending during a business meeting of the board, we can occupy, and thank you for the time the 4 of you are providing us today.
Our next item on the agenda is 1.6, information and update on referendum approved work. Mr. McCray, Mr. Leader.
So included in your committee packet is a brief one-page memo. Dave Leader, our senior facilities manager, and I have spent some time kind of going through, and really with Matt Sylvester, Knutsen's assistance as well, just in terms of where are we at budgetarily, and is there an opportunity for us to consider executing more projects under the authority granted the district by its referendum question related to debt. So you may recall back in November 2020, the community approved $22.5 million in issuing debt for improvements to our secure pathways, life safety systems, and 6 boiler locations within the district. So we had 2 partners on that project, in addition to Dave's leadership, EUA, Epstein Ewan Architects, the architectural and engineering firm, as well as JP Cullen, a local contractor who's done pretty much every building in the district since the dawn of time. So we've managed those dollars really well, and again, it's a partnership to manage those dollars. We've managed some year-end understanding of the budget, and so it's given us an opportunity to execute additional work under the auspices of the referendum question that the voters approved. So what we also did, and just to refresh the committee, is Tom Griggs, attorney at law, is our bond counsel. So we essentially vetted one particular item to ensure it was appropriate to consider as an expenditure, and that's really related to the BAS, the Building Automation System. So our building automation system is not up to par, not as fully functioning as it once was, but yet is critical. And if you think about it, to the incident that occurred over Christmas break, that I believe Mr. Leader may or may not have shared, in terms of the freezing of coils that occurred at Monroe and Madison, thank you. You know, that to some extent is part of a building automation system that we need to upgrade. So the nature of the question I included, I think, in the first paragraph, right? And again, Attorney Griggs said certainly a building automation system would be most appropriate. So I'm just gonna pause for a moment, probably turn it over to Mr. Leader to kind of go through the listing of projects, which accounts to just approximately $3.2 million. But before I do that, just one last item, sorry, Dave, is this is a rough order of magnitude, right? This is Dave and I, if you will, kind of doing pencil on the back of napkin math, right? These are not bid numbers. We still need to go through that process, right, and identifying it. But essentially, we're comfortable with the numbers. So we cannot and will not overextend any district obligation beyond the $22.5 million. And this is kind of above and beyond. Keep in mind, some outstanding projects we still have relate to our paging system, our camera system, right, as well as the completion. Again, our boilers are like really, really there. We just still have some switchgear obligations that we'll need to meet when that's available to be installed. We still have some small outstanding items which continue to nag related to phases 1, 2, and 3 of our secure pathways, and we still have a secure pathway project here at the Educational Services Center to complete. Right, so once we net all of that out, we believe we have approximately $3.2 million of the additional work to complete. Mr. Leader.
I'd like to start off with our life safety systems. As you see noted down here, we've got several fire panel replacements that are jotted down here, as well as replacing a complete fire alarm replacement. I'd like to tell you what the difference is there. If you look at our buildings like Washington, Roosevelt, Adams, we have very old life safety fire alarm systems that do not report out. So the existing audio devices and visual devices will not talk to the panel, okay? So if we're going to go in these buildings, we have to do a complete overhaul of the life safety system. We have a pretty good push from the local fire department that they would like to see reportable systems put in our district. We're about 80% there right now with our other buildings having the reportable. What that reportable system is if we do have, for an example, if we have a fire at 2 o'clock in the morning, that fire panel is gonna call out through the device to the panel to a monitoring service. So from right there, that goes right directly to the fire department. Obviously, some of the buildings, why we have them noted on here, we do not have that capability. So those are the buildings that we've captured, and this would get us up to code, if you will, for the remainder of the buildings. Credential readers, we went out, we met with our head custodians, maintenance department, provided a map of the building, asked them to, mark where each credential reader we have that exists, right? So we also looked at and asked them, all right, what are the busy doors? What are the most used entrances around here? And for an example, at an elementary building, recess, of course, is a huge thing. And what we've seen is we have a huge amount of use at these particular entrances, but they do not have credential readers. So what do we see? We see road cones propped in between a door and a door jamb, the door frame. So we have a security issue. I think it would be a lot easier for that staff member to use a credential reader to access in and out rather than trying to find a key or losing a key, right? I mean, if we're to lose a master key, we're looking at rekeying the whole building, which would be several thousands of dollars. So the more credential readers we can fit on these buildings, I think security-wise, the better off we will be. So that's one of the reasons, that is the main reason why this is on the list and very important. Say again? What was that, about $4,000 per reader. Yeah. There's a lot of work that's entailed into this. If you run into a door frame that won't accept a card reader, then perhaps you have to put a hollow metal to accept the wiring and the device that goes inside the framework. So, Dan touched upon the HVAC building automation system. Currently, we have a rather old system. It's proprietary. It's hard to find, the different components that are tied into air handlers, all the readers and that kind of thing, and they're very expensive, especially when you're only dealing with one type of product. We're looking at a Niagara type system. Controllers are interchangeable. It's not proprietary, and in the long run, we'd save some money on that. We'd also provide, in my opinion, some more security to our HVAC systems. Our current system, with our server being compromised, we lost a lot of data from our current system. So an upgrade of that would be tremendous for our district, even and especially on not only a safety but an energy perspective, because we've kind of lost that through this compromise. So. Marshall Middle School, replace existing hot water boilers with condensing boilers. Approximately 4 to 5 years ago, I spent thousands of dollars replacing the core of the boilers. They're sectional boilers, so I had new sections installed in these boilers. That's why they didn't make the boiler replacement list. So having these extra dollars, I think that would be a good thing for us to do, is to replace them with condensing boilers for an energy savings perspective. Franklin Middle School, you can see I'm adding a shoulder boiler. This shoulder boiler would be dedicated for the swimming pool. So during those summer months, you can run that high efficiency boiler rather than one of the larger capacity boilers and save energy that way as well. It makes more sense to do that. And then here at the ESC, we're looking at installing a backup generator, and that's for our server. We have nothing. If we have a power outage, we're down. What I'd also like to see with that is the life safety system on that generator as well, and even the cooling system for the server room. Once that heats up, you could lose that server as well. So that'd be another good application for that generator. And I believe that takes care of the list. Again, as Dan alluded to earlier, you know, we're looking at three different things here: life safety, security, and indoor air quality, that all intertwines in that referendum language. So, any questions?
Could you break down the 22.5, what's been spent so far, and then these I see add up to 3.2, but what is that all that's left of 22.5 to spend? And is there a time frame to spend the 22.5?
Yeah, great question. So the simple answer is, of the 22.5, 3.2 is what's available to spend, right? So again, we have what we spent, and so you saw a snippet of that in the audit report, right? But that's through June 30th, right? We've had subsequent expenditures, and then essentially what we have in terms of encumbrances or obligations related to the outstanding work. Right, so again, the camera system at the elementary K-8 levels, just approximately $1 million, right? I think just really a hair under, right? The overhead paging, and that goes just to essentially, you understand what audible paging is, sorry, and then that's essentially about $1 million as well, right? So if you think, all right, well, that's 5.2 million, right? We have about another $500,000, we'll say, designated for the ESC secure pathway, and that's a rough number. And then, yeah, so sorry, I didn't provide you itemized, but that's essentially where we're at. 3.2 is what's available of the 22.5. In terms of when, so ideally, right, we would like to be complete by 6/30/2024, right? So essentially 17 months from now, right? That is then essentially about 3 years from when we issued the debt. So we just want to be done with that and have it off of our books. If we come under, so let's say for some reason we're at 22.4 and we have an extra $100,000 remaining, and there are no ways to spend that within the auspices of the question, then we would just pay down debt service. So it cannot be obligated or used for anything other than the intended question. So if there's nothing left, then it goes to debt service.
The last thing I would say, thank you, that's helpful. And then I just hope that the community will take time to, I know as parents, like, you know, Marshall just reopened, or, not reopened, Marshall just opened their new entry. I hope the community takes time to see all those improvements and really see the magnitude of the improvement of safety for our kids. As relates to secure pathways, and I know we don't want to go into all the details of here's how I made communications better, or, you know, video monitoring, but the secure pathways that I think goes a long way in today's time to keep our kids safe, and I hope that the community, I'm thankful to the community for doing this, and then I hope that someone besides parents will take time to get in and see them too, as they were done well.
Yeah, no, and that's a very astute observation and sense of appreciation on your part, so thank you. I think one of the things, right, and frankly, it's been a little frustrating in terms of, you may recall, we had a community financial advisory committee that kind of gave, we provided that committee with an overview of school finance, essentially survey data, and they essentially gave the board kind of a, we believe this is worthy of your consideration type of approval. We'd like to have that group come back to see, okay, here's the fruit of essentially your investment in time, such as the boilers. We're not going to be able to hit every school, but maybe we go to Monroe as an example, where we have both boiler as well as the secure pathway. I think we've just been hesitant because there are still items that are outstanding. And we really would like to have that 100% complete. And I think too, and we won't wait for kind of some of these later elements to come into play, but it's really enhancements above and beyond, right? So we had the opportunity during the school board, the joint convention, Dave Leader, myself, and Commissioner Ardrey to present a session along with JP Cullen on secure pathways. And I think we tried to note that it's not just the pathway alone that provides a secure and safe environment. It is things such as your door access control, your procedures, and so on and so forth. But to your point, right, it's a very critical element. If we were building a building today, it would naturally have a secure pathway. And I think the other point we tried to make, and a little bit of a shout out to former Superintendent Pufall and the board, right, is a commitment to invest here before really looking at a much larger question, addressing as best as we can student safety.
Okay, Dan, when something's done, I know, a while ago we said that we didn't blow our own horn enough. When something's done, do we put it on the website like as Michelle said, the secure pathways at Marshall? Now that's done, so is that like? Oh, yeah.
No, yeah, so thank you for that. I think I started to go down that path and then I didn't. I think one of the things we'll produce, and it's often done post-referendum, whether it's an 8.5 by 11 slick sheet, right, or some sort of PDF we can post on the website, so long as you meet OCR compliance. But what can we push out there? The challenge a little bit, and again, Commissioner Hayworth alluded to it, right, and everyone knows it, is we can't say, this is our new protocol, but yet this is our new protocol, right? It's a lot easier to talk about boilers, right? It's a lot easier to talk about if we were doing improvements to a technical education classroom, right? Or an athletic field, right? They're very visual. I think we want to talk about it, but yet not, it's just a little bit of the art in terms of how we communicate that. Now JP Cullen assisted us from a graphic standpoint. And they're very good at that. They do a lot of pre-referendum work and kind of post-referendum work in terms of graphic pieces. We'll work with Patrick and do something, right? But just keep in mind, it probably won't be to a great deal of detail. It may just be here's the new secure pathway entry from an exterior perspective of Marshall Middle School. You'll notice the entrance is relocated in order to provide more of a secure pathway. That's probably really the detail, the level of detail that we'll go into. But we appreciate that and are thankful that you recognize that as well. And I think as soon as we're at least 99.9% done, we can begin to kick that out. Just a quick aside, I know, for example, Oakley Ryan, saw a piece in another district similar, already shared that with Patrick. We're appreciative of that. We're appreciative of her sensitivity in terms of communicating, again, to your Commissioner Hayworth's point of the good things that are going on in terms of how the dollars were leveraged for that 22.5. We'll do that. We're thankful. Thank you for sharing, but yes, we will naturally do that.
So Mr. McCray mentioned the convention session that we had. And one of the key components there is we look at the promises that we have. And safety being the key piece of that. I think when we tell the story, we'll grab these other components because they're equally as important. We can talk pathway, but the other pieces are still equally as important when it comes to overall safety and delivering on the promises that we have. So particularly to tell a story to spend, upwards of $500 million that we could be spending, which of course we won't be glad there, but we probably could. So it will be important of telling that story, if we're shooting for completion ideally, Mr. McCray said, by the end of June of 24, well, we need to tell this story long before that. Particularly if 24 we are looking to get to, well, we were at phase 0, which is focused on safety. Phase 1, we get into real building improvement pieces. So I think that'll be really important. So as we talk about encumbered funds, I guess I just want to understand a little bit of that. So is it an estimate for the work to be done? Is it an estimate for the material pieces like the switchgear component and some of those? Or do we have some of those prices, or the majority of those prices locked in?
The switchgear is?
That was.
Yeah, for the boiler projects, yes.
So,
I mean, and this list provided to you folks in the memo, those are, right now projected costs.
well, I was talking about the stuff that is really encumbered. That we've set up, and I thought the switchgear had been ordered, but as we look at completing the work, I know that Cullen has done a great job of making sure that our subs are within the limits of that. And I was just saying is, how much of it really has been, how much is an estimate versus how much has really been spent? Is that do you understand what I'm saying? So like the labor component, we haven't spent that part.
Right.
And that's gonna increase by the individual laborers, but not necessarily within the bid. And I was just saying, how much of that is really focused on by Cullen putting constraints around what that could be from an overall bid perspective?
Yeah, I mean, from what I've seen, as far as the material side of it, it's, their projected costs and all that are pretty spot on.
Okay.
If that's your question.
Not exactly, but it's one that maybe I'm not asking in a manner that's easy to.
But, I mean, they're estimating and all that I thought was,
Yeah, so if I'm following correctly, right, and I know you'll put me back on track if I'm not. So let's say for the 6 schools, and I'm rounding to the nearest millionth, the bid work came in at 2.9 million, right, for our 6 schools. We still have outstanding work to be completed, right? There is a material component, to your point, as well as a labor component, but we're still locked in at 2.9 million. So we will not see any fluctuations because that bid is that bid. Now, maybe somewhere in the contract language that Cullen has with the subcontractor, there's some sort of act of God language. But if that 6-location boiler project at 2.9 will be adhered to at 2.9.
Perfect. That was really, that answered. So then that gives us confidence to look at the list of 3.2. And is this in priority or no priority order? That's
It's all a
listed.
priority.
As it's listed. If we have
After district, it's
2
alphabetical.
million,
That's all.
If we have 2 million to spend, based on the estimates that come back, what would the 2 million be? Would we start at the top and go to the bottom, or would we pick and choose from this list?
Yeah, so that's fair, right? And Dave and I think touched on that topic. Most likely, we would address the life safety issues first, such as the fire panels, the door access controls, and most likely what would go would be the $500,000 slated for the Marshall boiler.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other questions? Great. Next item are future committee meeting items. Anything that anyone would like addressed? All right. Well, you'll address it anyway, but Mr. McCray.
So just to prepare the committee, so we've been waiting for 2 reports, and it's not because of the 2 individual vendors who are providing those reports. We were hoping it would be actually this evening, but most likely it'll be in February, to where we'll have representatives from the MD Roffers group. MD Roffers did kind of a community growth and enrollment projection for us. And then Epstein Union Architects did essentially capacity and utilization study for us. Essentially taking a look at enrollments, and it's very technical. And I don't want to, if you will, do their commercial for both reports. I'll allow those reports and those vendors to prepare that for you. I believe Commissioner Ardrey and I spoke to where we'll have that come to this committee. We have a rough draft of both reports. And then we'll push those out to you for your consideration. They're lengthy, so you'll have them, Ms. Hayworth, well before the Monday or Tuesday of the board meeting. So, because there are dozens and dozens and dozens of pages. But you'll get essentially an executive review of that. Those reports are critical, right, as we move forward in facility planning. Right? So the good news is from an enrollment, and this will be your sneak peek, is for a number of years, we were losing approximately 130 FTE, right, which is an important calculation for our revenue limit authority, all right, year after year after year. The pandemic was an additional 300, right, so we took a hit. We had the UW population lab study, which predicted kind of slow decline, right, that's great. But that slow decline, if not really somewhat stable, and over a 5-year period, an estimated increase of a whopping 40 FTE, right, from the MD Roffer study. So that's great for us, right? Because I think the fear is, okay, how do we facility plan, right, if enrollment is expected to drop and continue to drop dramatically over time? That's not, per the report, kind of a validation, if you will, the UW population lab report, going to happen. And I'll just stop talking about that.
So, and the intentions from that is we would review it and then refer it to the boundary line committee for the next deeper dive and see if, number one, are the because the purpose is how does this impact the boundaries lines that we've set up and the pathways that we've established? And then do we need to readjust that? That'll be the focus of that committee, not dealing with the facility side of it, just with the student flow side of it. So that's kind of the mindset. And then the boundary line committee reports back to this committee if any changes or anything are necessary. Okay, next meeting, Tuesday, February 21st. Does that work for everybody? Well, that probably want to be here. Probably want to record that report out. So, okay.
It's,
Well,
Well, no, because I always have a CISA 2 board
Yeah.
meeting at night.
understood.
Being Whitewater.
But
6:30.
I already said it doesn't work here. So Denise is going to tell me when could we meet?
So, Monday the 20th or Thursday the 23rd, both would be open to me at 12:30.
Okay. 20th or 23rd? Both work? Both are good with you?
20's the best for me, but I'll fit it in.
Oh, well, if the 20th is best, then that's really what I'm asking. What is the better day? So the 20th.
20th is for me.
Okay. There's
4:30.
4 o'clock?
The board rooms are booked until 3:45. We wouldn't have time to set up.
Okay, 4:30.
On the 20th.
Yes. Friday, Sunday.
That's what I was going to ask about next. So, right. Okay, we have reached the end of our agenda. We're adjourned. Dang it. Thought we'd be done inside of an hour.
Safety message to
I don't think so.